This is Meg. Hello, this is Meg Riley in frigid Minneapolis. It was 46 when I woke up this morning. Summer is over. You're here for another hour of The VUU. We've got a special guest today who we'll introduce in just a moment, but first let's have our regular guest say hello.
Hi, I'm Joanna Fontaine Crawford. I'm in Austin, Texas, and I have to disagree with you, Meg. It is obvious that summer is never, ever going to end. This is it for the end of time.
Hi, I'm Aisha Hauser, and I'm in Seattle, and it is actually quite sunny and beautiful. So we still have summer. I'm with Joanna.
This is Tom Shade in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and it is kind of 60-ish and sunny today, so I fear that Minnesota will be here tomorrow, and that I should get out my scarf as well.
Well,
in preparation.
It is unsettling. Behind the chalice today, we have a new tech person, Bob LaValle. Bob, you want to pop out and say hi? Oh. He's
hey,
shy.
Folks,
there he is.
Greetings from Buffalo, New York, the once and future home of the Buffalo Bills. It's great to be here.
Bob has stepped in as our tech person. Shauna Foster, who many of you know, has got a full-time job in Denver working to fight racism in the schools. She's really excited about that. She'll still be doing social media around the edge. In fact, she is tweeting at #TheVUU, TheVUU. Please feel free to tweet. You also can use the question and answer feature there and ask questions. Today we're going to be talking to Dr. Sharon Welch. Sharon is, gosh, I hope I get this right. I usually remember to check, the Provost. Is that the whole title? Provost at Meadville Lombard Seminary. And many of you have known Sharon. She's been active in many parts of our movement for years, and we're excited to talk to her about what's new at Meadville and all kinds of other stuff. But first, any of our regular panelists got anything on your mind that you want to bring up today?
I am just excited about a little thing, and I just have to tell you about this. We have Pride coming up here in about a week here in Austin, and so a couple of our members went out, got a rainbow flag, put it on our sign that's out by the street, and within 24 hours, I had people literally coming in off the street. This one young woman came in, interrupted a meeting I was having, and with tears in her eyes, just wanted to tell us thank you and said it was such a blessing to see that. And I don't know if this is because we're out in the suburbs and so they, don't expect that kind of thing. But, if you have a church and it doesn't have a rainbow flag on it, put one on.
Wow.
That's really interesting, Joanna, because Austin's a liberal place, right? It's not like you're in the middle of...
Well, Austin is, but see, we're out in the suburbs and we're in fact, a different county that is very conservative. It's Texas. Even in Austin, it's Texas.
Got it. Very interesting. I still remember driving in Oregon when that horrible ballot initiative was on, and the churches put giant red ribbons around the whole building and declared themselves hate-free zones. And I was driving through rural Oregon, and I pulled up and saw the Corvallis Church, and I just burst into tears. It felt like a haven, It just, yeah, I can imagine how that woman felt. That's great. Aisha, were you about to say something?
No, I'm just thinking about startup. We haven't started RE yet, so that's on my mind. I'm living and breathing it. We have OWL this year, which people are excited about, and lots going on. We have a big congregation.
How many kids you got in your congregation?
Right now we have 138 and 582 adults, and I'm also, I took on adult programs, so now I'm Lifespan. So I'm doing all of it. It's pretty cool.
Way cool. Tom, what about you? What do you...
Well, the big thing in our world was startup, and it was the first day the choir sang, and of course it sang on the Startup Sunday, and we are, our music director has come to full time. Ben Thomas
Ryder. Fabulous music director.
He's unbelievable, unbelievable. And he's full-time now, so that means he brought in a lot more energy, and the choir responded, so the music was like over the top. he is now done with his PhD program and plans to get active in National Unitarian Universalist Association worship.
I tried for 2 years to get him to come to GA and do CLF's worship music. So maybe this is our year. I'll have to go back to him. He's been
well, tell me what you're asking him, and I will reinforce, because you and I talked about getting involved in stuff too. He sang for he sang for 4 years with Jason Shelton. Did you know that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. He did a great homily for CLF last year on finding your voice. I should look it up. It's just a gorgeous homily. Yeah. Oh, that's cool.
He's on the preaching schedule this year, which is
Yeah, fabulous. Yeah, very excellent. Well, here in Minnesota, besides the cold going on, I think for me the most interesting thing going on right now is that there's just continues to be a whole lot of creative activism around police and policing issues, and there's just a lot to get involved with. It feels like there's been a lot going on for a while, but Ferguson kind of jump-started some things, and really, there's just no end to what can be done right now. And that I always feel like when those moments come, you got to grab them, and this is one of those. So
I think
I've been finding what I can, places to get involved.
I think the interesting thing with that now...
I consider getting on the...
Go ahead. Okay. The interesting thing about that right now is there's the beginnings of like national demands and a national movement and a national focus on that movement. Yeah. Instead of just local communities upset about particular incidents. Yeah. The Dream Defenders has a national set of demands from Philip Agnew, and the National Black Lawyers is now asking for the Justice Department to investigate, I think, 50 cities. So, that kind of begins to make a national focus, which then, of course, has every locality has a hook into that, and as well as, and it means that every incredible local incident adds another dimension to it. So it's kicked up as a movement. It's kicked up to another level. So which is important.
I went to a panel last night. There's an African American theater in St. Paul, Penumbra Theater, and they had artists responding. And one of the lines that actually a visual artist, Ricardo Levins Morales, he did the one of Trayvon Martin with Ella Baker's song written on it, until the killing of black men, black mothers' sons is important as the killing of white men, white mothers' sons. Anyway, he does beautiful images, but he said a line that I tweeted it. I just thought it was so profound. He said, in Ferguson, they're starting a community relations discussion, and he said, that's the wrong frame. He said, with slavery, it wasn't that they needed to have a discussion about the relations between the owners and the slaves. That was not the conversation that needed to happen. It's about power. It's not about better relations. And I just thought, wow, that just really cut through a lot of stuff. Also, a woman on the panel said there's a new book, which I'm going to try to find. They're going to send out a list of the resources, Framing Racism as a Form of Child Abuse. And having a kid of color, I would certainly say that is true. And so anyway, I'm really interested in that frame because I'm always interested in ways to change the conversation so that especially white people, I don't know about you guys, but I hear a lot of, I know, we talk about this all the time, okay, I get it. It's like, if we got it, we wouldn't need to keep talking about it, So anyway, I'm always looking for kind of new ways to think about a conversation that are compelling and accurate. So it was helpful. I liked hearing from artists about it. It was a good panel, good discussion. There were a couple hundred people there, and a lot of young people, a lot of high schoolers were participating in the conversation, which I really, really liked a lot. So. Well, let's move on to our guest, Sharon Welch, who certainly has had a voice in issues around race and gender and economics and many other of these public issues that we're talking about for a long time. Sharon, I first encountered you with your book, A Feminist Ethic of Risk, which was, what year did you publish that one?
1989.
Wow.
1989. Yeah, you did your UMA conversation, I remember.
It was a revised edition. It was updated in 2000.
Yeah, it's a great book. I still go back to it, and I think I'll call it a ministry. I think Aisha does a ministry. I think there are a lot of ministries that aren't about ordination. Has really been one of compelling people to think and to think rigorously about all kinds of things. So tell us, you started, you were a student at Vanderbilt, I know, in the early feminist theology movement, correct?
Oh, yeah. And before
and how do you see that moving to yes, all women?
Well, before I get into that, one of the things I want to kind of weigh in is on the Ferguson, and then get into this, because and it's going to relate to some of the things that I learned about. It was so exciting to be part of the early feminist movement at Vanderbilt, because I was involved at Vanderbilt, and the feminist movement, it was led by students. I mean, so we had faculty who were interested, but even then, Sally McFaig wasn't calling herself yet a feminist. She was sympathetic, but she was afraid people wouldn't take her seriously, and we banded together. And so as students, and this is a thing that I'm going to tie what we did there back to what I see as beginning to happen in Ferguson. One of the things that was so amazing is that as students, in every class, we would get together after class, and it wasn't complaining about how the class wasn't addressing what we wanted. We created caucuses, and we brought those questions to the professors. We took over the discussions. We changed the classes, and in doing that, we changed our professors, and we helped create the field of feminist theology and feminist ethics. And it was, we had faculty who were interested in liberal politics, and we helped them switch to radical politics. And so there was a real sense that there was this mutual learning together, and it wasn't just critique. There was a sense that you could really change the structures of an organization. And what I love about the possibilities, getting back to what you were talking about, Tom, in terms of the national possibilities of change with Ferguson, is I am so thrilled that constructive work that I know of that colleagues have been doing for 20 years that gets at the heart of this problem can now be implemented on a national stage. And one of them is Aaron Thompson. I worked with him at the University of Missouri, African-American professor, and he worked on multiracial justice in the university as well as with the police department in Columbia, Missouri. And he has a consulting firm that does that for police departments across the country. And it's getting at the heart of it. You just don't denounce the violence. You stop it, but you have to stop it where it's systematic training of every new police officer and ongoing training, because of the stereotypes that we have in our culture are going to trigger violent responses on the part of police officers unless you have ongoing systematic, getting back to your point, Meg, power from the top, structures of accountability. So it's not something you train once and it's done. It's there every day. And so one of the things, for example, they've implemented in Columbia and other cities is, wearing cameras. So there's that level of extra accountability. But so again, Aaron, I've known him since when I met him in the early 90s. He's been working carefully honing how you work with police officers to stop those kind of racist, violent reactions. So we don't have to make it up. There are solutions, and they're ready to be implemented. And on the other side, when we saw the police force being so dreadful and inciting violence with the way they related to the demonstrators, my friend Vern Redicott, who does conflict mediation, and he's in Canada, has a whole book based on working with police departments in Canada as well as South Africa, protest crowd relations, where you train the police department for part of your role is supporting peaceful protest in a democratic society. And it's an ongoing, again, it's very detailed, it's based decades of work, it's like how you heal when something like this happened at Ferguson, but also how you prevent it in the first place. And so again, I know I posted it on Facebook. I loved it because I think of all my students who are now ministers in their cities. When you're going to your mayor and your city council, there are these resources, and I'm sure there are more. It's not that you know it's wrong.
Yeah. There's a good documentary. There's a good documentary about a Connecticut town that really turned things around. And I know I was talking to Adam Gerhardstein in Cincinnati, where he said that they've really turned it around. One thing that Adam said that I hadn't realized is that they really, because I was saying, I don't understand why they don't shoot the tires of cars that are running away, or why they don't shoot the legs of some, you know, like why do they, he said they're trained to shoot to kill. It's an escalation of force that meets force, and that they're absolutely trained to kill. And so if they're trained to kill, that's what they're going to do. And so they really have to change that training so that they're not thinking about continuing to escalate. They're actually trying to de-escalate, which they've done successfully in Cincinnati. Aisha, did you want to say something?
Wait, yes, I think one of the things, I mean, today's the anniversary of 9/11, and we have to look at everything in context, and the militarization of the police happened in reaction to 9/11, my understanding. And so there's an overreaching context of fear. So people are shooting to kill because there's this pervasive national in our psyche that we're under attack all the time. And it existed somewhat before 9/11, but after 9/11, it feels like we've been in constant national anxiety. And so you know, I'm listening to Sharon, and everything you're saying is so compelling, and I'm thinking, yes, but there's pervasive fear, and it hasn't lessened. And if anything, we keep finding reasons to make it worse. Yeah. So how do you get past that?
Well, and one of the things I really liked about the work that Aaron Thompson did with the police department in Columbia, Missouri, was it's assuming, and this is kind of like a basic principle, like in different, even yoga, spiritual practice, and it's in Buddhist thing, it's like some of the fear isn't going to go away in the immediate future, but how you respond to it can be changed. And so there's a kind of vigilance of realizing, and then you also have to have the vigilance of other police officers. So again, Meg, it can't be trained to escalate, trained to de-escalate violence. That's the help of the cameras. You know, so your reaction to fear is going to be on tape. It's going to be there for everybody. And so it's realizing that for the foreseeable future, that fear is going to be fed, but we don't have to act on it in the same way. But it requires a collective response. It's not something that just an individual can do on their own, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really systemic. I just wanted to say that Patrice Curtis just texted, and she has really loud equipment outside of her house right now. So she is live tweeting today instead of being with us on The View. Hey, Patrice, glad that you can watch anyway, and I hope that the noise goes by soon. Join us if it does. So, Sharon, you've been involved in so many of these community movements. So let's just start by framing out for people who don't know you as well. Kind of, here's what I know about you. Correct me. You went to Vanderbilt, and you started to tell stories about that. Then you went directly from there to teach at Harvard. Is that what happened next?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you went to the University of Missouri in Columbia for a number of years before coming to Meadville. So you've been in really different places, sizes, cultures of schools. I mean, those are 4 really different schools. And I'm sure that wherever you are is always the most fun. But I'm really curious what you bring to Meadville from being in those other schools. What each of those schools has contributed to your way of thinking about theological education.
Well, it's in some ways what I bring to each of those is a continuation of the way I was raised, because I was raised in a social gospel, liberal Christianity family. And I remember being surprised when I went to college, and some people said, well, you know, 2 things you don't talk about in polite society are religion and politics. Well, that's all my family talked about. That's the point of religion, you know, if it's not making a difference. And so we'd have prayers at meals, and the closing phrase was always, help us be aware of the needs of others. And meeting those needs, not just in individual ways, in systemic ways. So my mother started a school that provided quality education for students with mental and physical disabilities. At that time, like in the 60s and 70s, they were just kept at home or kind of warehoused. So she did that. My father on the hospital board, their farm policy, all of the stuff, different forms of activism. And so I've always been interested in the way in which religion can either be a force or a kind of indwelling group superiority, or it can open us to this joyous, life-giving, flourishing that enables the flourishing of others. And so I've always looked at work for social justice not as a self-sacrifice, but in enlarging the self. And it's at the core of what it means to be alive. And in each of these institutions was a place to deepen and sharpen that sense of spiritually based creative activism. So I'll give you a shorthand of what happened at each one. So Vanderbilt, I get there, and it's so exciting because I have all of these liberal faculty discovering feminism and discovering liberation theology. And so it's from Sally McFake, who's given a part-time position because her husband has a job, even though she was a star student at Yale. At that time, women weren't being given jobs in higher education because, you know, they're just going to have kids, right? And so, I mean, it was that kind of basic sexism. And seeing Sally break through that. And as students, we helped her. Also, as I mentioned before, the move from liberal politics to liberation. And so we were learning liberation theology and what that meant. We were learning black theology. And my dissertation was looking at that fundamental shift in the differences between and similarities, liberation theology, feminist theology, black theology, and the whole switch, where the truth of any religious tradition is what it does, not what it says. All right? So that's the thing. It really make a difference. When I go to Harvard, I'm hired, and I love the shift. It was, my lecture was the nuclear arms race as a test of faith. In the sense that at that time, I believed, as others did, we were really on the verge of extinction because putting cruise missiles in Europe and the chance of accidental nuclear war, and you talk about this kind of trigger reaction to fear. Well, actually, there was so much there on both sides in terms of the Soviet Union and the United States, and saying we really have to deal with this. And while I was there, George Rupp, the president, Gordon Kaufman, who was a senior professor of theology, were also really aware of these kind of systemic things. We also had, with Connie Buchanan, bringing in women scholars to really rethink religion and feminist scholarship. So it was a place to do that. It was there that I worked with Katie Cannon and learned the materials that became a feminist ethic of risk. And it was being immersed in working with Katie Cannon, the literature that comes from the African American experience, and then the students in Harambee, the African American students at Harvard, their worship services, gave me a completely different religious vocabulary of how worship can hold both despair and fear and rage and yet joyous audacity and defiance at the same time. Right? And so it was so I saw what church can be in a really powerful way. I seen changed in the direction of the school was no longer that kind of progressive social engagement. The reason why I went to the University of Missouri is that was a chance to really work with women's studies and black studies and peace studies and multicultural education. And I love the fact of moving from a place that is so liberal, like New England, where it's, you know, you have competitions on who can be more radical than the next person. I love the challenge. Okay, my students at the University of Missouri, I would say 60% were conservative, another 30% were very conservative, and 10% moderate. You know, and so coming up with a language of social justice that can speak that population was transformative. And then to bring all of these together to Meadville, and where I'll kind of give you a teaser where it's so exciting to bring what I've learned from those to a place of training the ministers who throughout, I think, U.S. history have been at the forefront of social change, the tools to help shape, like Paul Hawkins has said, folks, there's good news. We're in the largest social movement in human history, and most people don't quite recognize what's going on because it doesn't fit the old scripts. But it's happening. We can help shape it, and we can help it grow.
Am I unmuted? My mute is teasing me today. Sharon, what is the largest social change movement in human history? Can you say more about that?
I will, because this is as big, and I just love it. I love it. It's as big as the invention of civil rights movements. It's as big as feminism. It's as big as Gandhi and nonviolence. And what it is, it's a movement from critique to constructive engagement. I'll give you an example. Paul Hawkins has written a book about it called Blessed Unrest. And he's describing, here just a part of the movement, he's describing millions of nonprofit organizations all over the world who are addressing basic issues of economic inequality, environmental degradation, and learning from the wisdom of indigenous traditions and cultures in doing that. And he doesn't even look at the vast explosion of social enterprises and B corporations who have as, and again, this is so bizarre, as their core explicit mission, people, planet, profit. And I think of our language, of our principles, in the B corporations, the core is interdependence rather than independence. And so it's changing how we shape our economy so it really does serve the greater good rather than just individual satisfaction. And what's so exciting is the goal of like social enterprise and B corporations, they're not out there trying to change other corporations. They're creating their own businesses to provide, again, more than a minimum wage, provide a sustainable, catalytic living wage, pay attention to the environment. It's like rather they see themselves as providing the missing middle where there's a paralysis in the terms of the efficacy of government of being able to regulate. Quite often nonprofits really spend a lot of time trying to raise money, and business groups of people are the same, but we're just going to do it ourselves and provide the kind of impetus for other people to do it. So it's looking at that logic, and what I'm working on in a new book, as well as participating in this, is what are the ethical challenges of after the protests are heard? Right? Once you decide to solve problems. One last point, and then hear what questions that you have. This is another way of looking at this largest social movement in history, and I see it as being a third stage in a very important trajectory. So the first stage is the awareness of forms of systemic social injustice, where things that were taken for granted for millennia as either God's will or the natural order are seen as caused by humans and being wrong. So sexism, classism, racism, homophobia, degradation of the environment, that these are systems that have been created by humans and they can be changed by humans. And so that continues, gets back to that point you were making, Meg, that this isn't just about issue of right relations, it's power, right? It's not just individual police officers in a community getting on. There's structures of power that are wrong. That's the first stage. The second stage has been realizing that we need everybody. So, the diversity of LGBTQ, intersex, of race, of cultures. And I love it when science confirms this kind of political insight. So the science is showing that a more diverse a group is, it's trickier getting together at the first because you don't have the same kind of cultures, but a diverse group is more effective at solving complex problems. This is in science or business, social justice, than a homogenous group. It's more creative thinking, more diversity you have. And then so the last thing that leads into where I see this is the largest social movement, once we know what's wrong, once we know who needs to be included, what are we going to do? How are we going to fix these things? What institutions are we going to create? I see it as an amplification of what I love about the Standing on the Side of Love campaign. It's standing on the side of love in every aspect of our lives, as citizens, as professionals, as business owners, as investors, and doing that in a very deliberative, creative way.
The word you used was a social enterprise?
Yes.
Is the church a social enterprise?
Some are, because you look at there's a revenue stream, and what makes really sometimes more a social enterprise, and this language starts being used in like 1999 by Gregory Deese, who just passed away. He was a professor at Duke. And I encourage, there's the Social Enterprise Alliance, their website, and national conventions. And what it is a social enterprise, though, has streams of not only a commitment to the social good, which is its DNA, that's why it exists. So it's not like Tom's Shoes is one, Patagonia, all right? But they've got an income stream, so they're not just dependent on donations. So in some ways, churches are social enterprise in the sense the reason why they exist is this kind of larger service. But I think it's more likely that what you're going to find, and this is what we're going to be doing next with our students is how do congregations support their congregants who are probably, if they're not already running their businesses as social enterprises, could. Okay? So not so much the church is a social enterprise, but the church is providing the ethical and theological support for the people who are running social enterprise.
Well, when I was in the parish, I always felt that the church was, that it was kind of a social enterprise. It's just not a very, very good one, right? Not a very effective one. That we never got beyond kind of the initial investor stage where everybody, where all the people who are in the enterprise throw in their own money to make it run. We never got to the point where people invested enough to develop an income stream that wasn't just people, paying for it themselves, and that that all the work around social entrepreneurial stuff was something we needed to really look into, because that the model was antiquated. It didn't work anymore.
Are there churches who do that? I'm sorry. I'm interested, Tom. It seems like you've paid attention to this. Are churches have developed their income streams and moved to the next stage of, I'm thinking NATO Dread Pirate was on and was saying, monasteries all have a way to make a living. And they were talking about starting a microbrewery there. In North Carolina. I don't know how they're doing that, but I thought it was a really creative idea.
I think we need to go down and investigate.
There you go.
Site visit from the VUU, I don't know if people inside our movement who have done that, but I think other churches have been more successful with that. I've always wanted to build a breakfast restaurant and church combined, but people love to go out to church, go out to breakfast after church. So let's bring them in. Go ahead, Joanna.
Or a coffee shop. And I think though that it's going to require us to change some ways of our thinking, and an example of that is the church where I'm serving now at Live Oak. About a third of our income comes from the outside, from like we have a long-standing, we rent to a synagogue and some other programs, and several people that I spoke to when I was candidating outside of the church, good knowledgeable colleagues and such, saw that as a negative, as should you be getting that much, it shouldn't more of it be coming from within. And then I spoke to she used to be our district executive, I'm not sure what her title is now, Susan Smith, and she said, or maybe this is the direction that most churches need to be going in, where we're not relying on the members to be providing everything. But that's an example of how it's not just going out and finding it, it's also battling some existing prejudices that we already have of this is how we do church. And Sharon, something I wanted to ask you, I'm just so excited hearing about this, and Tom, when you check that email I sent you earlier, you can testify that I had already been writing about this. But something that I've been thinking about is how in our churches, have you ever heard the term pet project used as a pejorative? Because I have at several churches. Like someone has their passion and they want to bring it into the church in some way, and someone will be like, oh, well, that's their pet project, and roll their eyes. And so I've been thinking about, because I happen to be at a church where I am not going to call them pet projects, where people have these burning coals that they are doing amazing things out in the world, and wait, how about if rather than trying to find the one perfect project that all of us will sign on to, we figure out how to empower these people who are already going out and doing this? I mean, is that kind of like what you're talking about on the church basis?
It really is, and I think it relates to one of the things I found so powerful in my experience of the church in Columbia, Missouri, and in talking to Bill Scholes when he was head of Amnesty. He reedified it because he said almost any town that he would go to or city, the people who were at the core of Amnesty and really doing work were Unitarian Universalists. Now, they weren't necessarily doing it as part of their congregation, but it was those values that were sustaining them. And I remember when I was doing things as director of women's studies, and I don't know if some of it was my own reluctance or if there was really something about the congregation there, when I hit these real battles, I felt like I had no place to share it. And I wish the congregation, they didn't have to take on women's studies and feminism, but if they could have been a place when I was rolling on the floor, sobbing on a failure, feeling like my life was ended, I didn't feel like there was permission to share that kind of pain or a place for it. And so I think at that point, providing that kind of healing, that would be so vital for the church. And the church doesn't need to be involved in every one of those, but to sustain us as we're doing them. Yeah.
Right. The church won't adopt the pet.
I'm interrupting because we're more than halfway through, and I want to just reintroduce ourselves. We can finish with you, Joanna, and you can continue the conversation. But you are watching another episode of The VUU with our special guest, Dr. Sharon Welch, who is the provost at Meadville Lombard Seminary. Others reintroduce yourselves as well, Aisha and Tom, and then we'll move back to Joanna and Sharon's conversation.
Hi, I'm Aisha Helzer, and I'm in Seattle, Washington.
And I'm Tom Shade in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Joanna.
And I'm Joanna Fontaine Crawford, very excited to be talking about this in Austin, Texas. So, Sharon, that's kind of one of my questions. What you were just talking about is what all can we do to support and empower? And I agree with you. I think the flip side of this is also that we have an understanding within our churches of, look, we as the church are not going to adopt your burning coal. You know, we are not going to become the place where you come and get all of the resources, all of the people. But we want to empower and equip you so that you can go out and do this work. So you were talking about the emotional side of it. Yeah. Are there other elements?
Well, yeah. I think it's multifaceted. And so I want to get to this kind of as a both and, where I think there's a place for collective congregational action. But on this, of providing the support for the people who are doing this as part of their professions or as citizens is in a sense of really being able to name what it is about our Unitarian Universalism that leads us to do this and to be able to celebrate that. Right, and the stories, and know that we're part of this, and doing this work, we're part of this long legacy. I think one of the things that's fascinating is our archivist here at Meadville Lombard, John Leaker, is going to be doing a major project at Collegium, and that UU history has been so slanted to telling the story of the elites, of our ministers, and not of our congregants, who the way they've lived their faith has transformed not only their lives, but their community. And so how we begin to really look at that and honor that. And I think of it in terms of stories we tell our children, as well as the place for mourning and celebration and worship.
Can I jump on that? One of the things that I'm disappointed in our faith is that I experience Unitarian Universalism as not training lay leadership and empowering lay leadership, I think, in a way that can be sustainable. I mean, we have a lot of ministers, and we have more ministers than we have congregations, and I love ministers. My best friends are ministers. And how do we empower those in our congregation who not only have passion, but know how, empower them to minister to each other and sustain and be stewards of our faith? Because we're terrible at inviting people to our congregations and saying, hey, I'm a UU, come to our church. How do we do that without just continually sending people to seminary?
Yeah. Well, and that's at the core of one of the things that we're doing as part of our education is developing a style of leadership for ministers. And it goes by many different names. There's such an epistemic shift in our culture now, but the phrase I like to use is catalytic leadership. It's basically, how do you be a leader of leaders? And how do you bring your expertise into helping other people exercise their leadership? And so it's more that synergistic and collaborative way. And so, for example, what we we have our student. This is another way of looking, Joanna, you were talking about the PEP project, is we have our students in a 2-year internship in a congregation. And there's this challenge for them to not impose a social justice project on that congregation at all, but rather come in this first year and discern, where is this congregation, and this gets back to a concern with lay leadership, where is it ready to grow in some kind of deep cross-cultural, multiracial engagement? You know, that's not just individual, but it's systemic, and it's there. There's a readiness, but all it needs is some time, some focus, and as an intern, you can give that time and focus, right? You can help identify the leaders. You can do the structuring of it. And so the goal is they spend the first year figuring it out, the second year beginning to implement it, and hoping that they will leave as a legacy a way in which lay leaders can collaborate more effectively with the minister to keep our values, justice, equity, and compassion alive. And again, ways that fit that congregation, not your pet cause.
Well, good segue, because I was just thinking, okay, well, let's talk a little bit about Meadville. I mean, clearly you have a wide breadth of experience and passion and interest, and speaking for myself, I'm so thrilled that you've chosen to dedicate a significant portion of your life to facilitating good leaders for our future. So what have you learned at Meadville? You all have been, as an outsider, making so many changes, and CLF, I will say, in the interest of full disclosure, Bob, who's behind that chalice, is a Meadville intern working with us for 2 years, which is fabulous, and we have certainly benefited from our connection with you. But I'm curious, what are you most excited about with all of the changes that are underway at Meadville there, and what do you think is going to be different with the people who are emerging from your new model of ministerial training?
What we've done in this model, we first implemented it in 2009. So this is the 5th year. We've got 3 classes that have graduated. And we're seeing that this is providing leadership in 3 ways for this new social movement of constructive social engagement. And it's providing leadership ministers who can do it, ways they can shape their congregations to do it, and ways they can support their congregants as professionals and citizens in this new way of doing social engagement and social change. And we're finding that this is being affirmed by 3 different sources. Most importantly, the stories that we get from our students when they're out in ministry, how they get this fire, this kind of collaborative work they're able to do with their congregations, and bringing the congregations, the leaders in, the lay leaders, as well as serving the local community. We're finding in terms of our students meeting with the MFC, amazed at students who are being able to be there in ways that are supportive of each other and having a real vision of not at all being afraid of the fact that church isn't going to look the same in 10 years as it does now, all right? That these are ministers who come in and they've got the resources to make that change happen. And the third thing is the Association of Theological Schools. Just this last summer, they've had a major initiative, and it was preparing for 2040 when whites are the minority. And they had over 50 theological schools participate in multi-year self-studies of how we can train ministers for that kind of cross-racial leadership. In their last annual meeting in June, the session that they had for the model of how to do that, my friend Emily Towns, who's the dean at Vanderbilt, she moderated it. She was on the committee. Meadville was the model that shows how to do it, because we begin with students their first year outside the church. Okay, so to change the church, you begin outside the church. So people are doing community service where they live, something that immerses them for a full academic year in multiracial work and and where they really learn that from the inside. And then they're able to bring that process of discovery to their congregations. So what we're at the stage now is we've discovered something that really does seem to be transformative, and it's sharing it with a wider audience, with more students, Master of Divinity students who want to educate more Unitarian Universalist ministers, as well as more lay leaders, so expanding our master's programs. So there can be this kind of constructive leadership for social change in regard to race, environment, economics, sexualities, gender, across the board.
Hey, Bob, you want to come out from behind the chalice and say how that fits with your experience at Meadville, or do you want to hide right now?
I'll step out from behind the curtain. Well, to tell my lived experience of the model that Sharon was just talking about, I'm a second-year student at Meadville, and I spent my first year working 1 day a week, an entire day a week, for the whole academic year at a day shelter for homeless folks in the Georgetown neighborhood of DC. And everyone is obliged to set up these community sites, and we're directed to explicitly avoid management positions, but rather do line work. So I have an MBA in nonprofit management. I probably could have worked there as a grant writer or as an operations or finance person. Instead, I was the person responsible for scheduling showers. The folks have an opportunity to take a shower there. They get 15-minute showers. So I just set up the schedule and knocked on the door and told people when to come out. And the rest of the time, I sat with folks, homeless folks, and talked to them about their lives. I was just there and present. And the depth which that simple model brought me to the realities of that life across class, across race, was critical for my formation. And I'd say I had a typical experience as far as what my classmates report too.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. That's really
And I'd like to highlight several dimensions of that. So I'm glad, Bob, because that's the type of thing that most of the students do. And again, it's very important. We say you're there to serve. Right? You're not there to lead. You observe leadership styles, and we talk about it. And of course, most of our students, their second career, they've been like Bob. They've had significant leadership. But this isn't, as it's a gift to not have to do that and to really immerse yourself in getting to know another population. One of the things, again, that's also very powerful about that is beginning from that place of service is everything that we study, like theologically. So your first class, you're grounded in serving the people who are most marginal and vulnerable. And this gets back to my days at Harvard. I was teaching a class on Christology, and we were doing all of the theories, but what turned that class around was Lark to Helen, who was working in a shelter for domestic violence, and it was sponsored by a church, and how she saw in this shelter, these women were Christian, was how the understanding of Jesus was both a salvation and a trap. Jesus cared, but also they hadn't sacrificed as much as Jesus, so they were told to go back and bear their cross, right? That changed everything. And so what we've done at Meadville is make, for everyone, for this, anything we study about theology and ethics, for it to be real, it needs to make sense for people who are homeless, for people who are victimized, in the most extreme situations. It's not just a head game. Another thing that's so significant about it is we're finding a very different way of working at white awareness and what it means, the sensitivity of whiteness and the complexities of it and how it's a system and how it's maintained and how we're complicit. If you learn that, well, you're of service to people of color. That changes everything.
So Sharon, I have a question. So this was never part of the seminary training before?
Well, and what it was, like in other seminaries had this as sometimes it's an elective or occasional. This is a full third of our curriculum. It's required. You can't get around it. If you come to Meadville, and I remember one of our students talking about doing his work also in a homeless shelter, and he only did it because he had to. He didn't think it would make any difference at all. And he talks about going in with his $5 latte from Starbucks, sitting there doing the intake interviews for talking to people, and then after a time realizing that sitting there was a place of holiness, that there was a chalice, like to be present and acknowledging the dignity of someone else's lives. And again, okay, it's this double-edged sword. The privileges that he had as a white man, and yet what he could do with that power for him as a white man to listen and be transformed by the stories of people of color, To learn those at the same time is humbling and transformative. Two other things that we found absolutely essential about this, and this is why I'm so committed to doing this work within the context of the church and theological education. The first year that we had this program and people were doing the kind of work that Bob was, the students hated it. And when I took it to my colleagues, this work group in constructive theology, one of my colleagues, Wendy Farley, who studies both Buddhism and Christian traditions, asked us the right question. She said, well, Sharon, what kind of worship resources are you providing the students?
Hmm.
And I realized we weren't. And so now our very first exercises in the class, you remember, Bob, it's the beauty walk. It's a very particular spiritual practice. And then we have people read and choose a discipline that they're going to follow for the year. We revisit it in January. And so it's everything that is done is spiritually grounded. A last point is that in doing this work, well, like Bob, you're in your site one day a week by yourself. You're in a triad with two other people across the country who are doing similar work, and you meet every week to reflect on what you learn. We give particular questions, particular assignments, and I'm sure you're talking about far more than what we have as our assignments, but students talk about it. As faculty, we respond weekly. We have monthly conference calls, and what we're doing, and again, genuinely, I promise my last point, is that we're creating a learning community. It's like how you learn across distance and across time to be together and support each other in this form of creative social engagement.
So how does that year of community service change people's perspective the next year when they really immerse themselves in a congregation for 2 years? How do you see that shifting what they see in a congregation or know or do?
Bob, you want to answer that from your experience?
It's for me, at the beginning of my second year, it feels a little too soon to say how we're different. I will say, and it's also hard to tease out what happened because most of us went to CPE. We did our chaplain training this summer too, and that is one of those powerful grounding experiences that really helps people see the minister that they are or can be.
Minister Boot Camp.
Right. So we just had our fall convocation. We all met together in August, one of our rare, periodic through the year, we actually are face-to-face. And I noticed a real difference in the anxiety level. It was much, much lower in my class now. People are much calmer, much more grounded, much more ready to do the work, and frankly, get away from this classic first year sort of jockeying for position, trying to figure out where they belong, what their identity is, and settle down and do the real work of formation.
And one of the things that we find is that my favorite session when we have these fall convocations, we bring everybody together. So they're all over the country and they come together to share, is the panel on Monday night where we have people who are in leadership studies meet with the students who are in community studies. And the leadership studies say what they learned and how this first year of community service changed their understanding of ministry. And one of there are some of the themes that are repeated is, one, this kind of awareness of how powerful the role is of service, so of servant leadership and of acting, and that's what you model, and also to provide those opportunities for members of your congregation because it transformed you. So the kind of work you're doing, Bob, transformed you. So you want to offer that for members of your congregation. One person, what they're doing in their leadership studies year, their focused initiative, is coordinating members of the congregation to do this kind of systemic volunteer work in terms of prison ministry, right? And then leading it to the next step. Well, okay, maybe can we make the kind of commitment that some evangelicals have done? Let's not just do prison ministry, let's provide jobs. So if you're in a business, are you going to commit to hire ex-cons? If you rent apartments, are you going to commit to providing housing rather than immediately saying no? All right, so it's like doing that kind of work. We have students who they'll take their congregation on a College of Social Justice trip and say, how does that change what we're doing? And so people talk about that. And I think, again, one of the things is getting back to what many of you said already, they learn the power of collaborative leadership. And that sometimes the most powerful thing the minister can do is listen. And then out of that deep listening, have the key words that catalyze people to be more fully alive. And so a sense of a work for social justice isn't a pet project. It's not an imposition. It's a duty. It's just part of breathing. Right? It's part of being open to what's around us.
You know, this is so exciting. I think for me, I have felt frustrated with Unitarian Universalism in that there has been what I have felt has been a false separation between kind of doing your internal soul work and transformation and service. You know, that there's been this attitude of like those are completely separate. And it sounds like what you're doing is you're giving students a conversion experience.
Yeah.
These are now going to be people who are going to go out and testify that the way you do that soul work, you know, that it's all connected. You go out and you're not going to not be affected by this. This is exciting.
And also one of the things, and this is one of the things what we're going to focus on at our January convocation, where we come together with teaching pastors who are supervising as well as students, is to do this work, and it's kind of like the soul work is at the core of this kind of constructive engagement. It's failure. It's making mistakes, sometimes making problems worse rather than better. And how are you honest enough? And how do you solicit that kind of feedback so it's not, we don't want to be the Christian mission schools anymore, but we know the answer and we destroy a culture in order to save it. Okay. So how do we make it possible to solicit that kind of critique and then learn from it and hold it? And even in fact, we've realized we've done it is that the language, sometimes like what people will call failure, failure seems kind of an odd thing for me anymore. I think of, for example, with the school, in these conversations that we had when we were thinking of a partnership with Andover Newton, the fact that we decided not to do it, I don't think was a failure. It showed that we were smart when we figured out there were structural things that made that not the best. You know, so why is that a failure? You know, I'm glad we tried. So it's like not everything you try is that going to bring about more justice, but that's part of the process.
Amen to that. We are wrapping up an hour. I'm going to invite people to say any last thoughts. And Sharon, my thought is just, it's totally irrational, but just how proud your parents would be to see their legacy continuing through the work and through your love of the work. It's just so fun to see how on fire you are, and imagine that transmitting, the transmission element of the education. Aisha, you want to go?
Yes, I want to thank you very much, and this is an exciting and an important shift, and a necessary one if Unitarian Universalism is going to stay relevant in the future and not be the faith of the intellectual elite. And as ministers transform themselves, they will inspire others to do this work as well in their congregation. So this is very exciting. Thank you.
Let me just say, you know, I come from that same Christian social gospel background that you do, apparently, Sharon. That was the religious tradition of both sides of my family, and but it came down to me in a much more discouraged way, a much more let's say kind of Calvinist. Aren't we all failures? Aren't we failures for not living up to what God has hopes for us to do? And the thing that just radiates off of you is your level of enthusiasm, optimism, and encouragement. And I'm very moved by that, very moved by that. So thank you. Thank you for bringing that here today. I need that sometimes.
Sharon, as always, so inspiring to be around you.
And for me, so inspiring to be around all of you. And Meg, the same thing. I am so thankful to Mother and Dad and Granny and Grandpa and Nanny, because it's we love as we were loved. And I wouldn't have been able to do this without them.
Amen to that. Thanks for joining us for an hour of the VUU. We'll be back next week talking about the big upcoming environmental action that's going to take place in New York City in late September. And we will see you then, and have a great week, everyone.
Bye-bye.